So the Fed says we're going to see a correction or crisis, maybe even a recession when it comes to the market. Honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. We're actually going to be talking about that today, showing how really when it comes down to the market, when you see this little ticker down here in most news sites, does that really affect you? And for the majority of Americans, they could care less what the NASDAQ or Dow is going to do. They care more about how they're going to pay their mortgage or utilities or insurance this week when they don't get a paycheck till next week. We're actually going to discuss how a market crisis could actually benefit Americans. You may be blown away at what I'm going to say. Also, we're going to talk about how even though we see that we need to quit spending money, the Republicans and Democrats alike both spent money this week. We'll discuss what 26 senators just signed on to keep on giving foreign aid, even when Doge said it was going to corrupted sources. That's why I go back to that first point of, this could be our final chance to actually see a correction in the market and actually be okay with it, because we need to get a hold in actually fixing some of these issues. Then we're going to talk about Social Security, how we can actually fully fund it if we played our cards right. We're going to discuss something that I heard. And when you talk about truthfully how we can save Social Security, that actually makes Americans more happy than what the NASDAQ or the Dow is going to do. Let's dive into these stories today. This video starts right now. I want to tell you a story first about a gentleman I met about 10 years ago. He passed away now, but he was in his 80s when I met him. And he made a comment. He said, we heard when we were kids, we were in the quote-unquote Great Depression. And he said, we never felt that. We still went to our school, which they had a school at their church. And he said, we still came home. We still did our chores with the chickens and with the gardens. He said, my dad still went to work. And he said, my mom was still home. He said, we'd see it in the newspapers and we'd hear our neighbors talk about it. But to be honest with you, it never really changed anything here in the South. And he was in, of course, Mississippi, because that's where I'm at. But he said for most country folks, they could care less what the market was doing or this quote-unquote depression was doing. He said we just kept living like we always lived. Now let's talk about here in crisis with the market. You've heard the terms crisis with the market and that we're going to feel a recession. And there's actually some economists saying Trump could want to see the market go down, like he made a comment last week stating that he's not looking at the market. And for the longest, I thought that was a bad comment. But to be honest with you, the more I think about it, I'm like, that might be the most brilliant thing, because the people that are in the market are going to keep on making money. They're going to keep on being extremely well off. And all these markets, even when they correct, they always come back. And that leads me to another point with Social Security in just a second. But overwhelmingly, when you hear that you see in like Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or whomever you're watching, there's this little ticker down here and it's either green or red. It tells you how bad the market's doing that day or how good it's doing. Honestly, ask yourself, does that actually affect you? Does that help you get a check or not get a check this next 2 weeks? Does that actually lower your bills for the time being every time that ticker goes up and down? No. Really, all you're worried about is making sure you can pay your credit card, pay your mortgage or your rent. Also, can you afford your automobile for the week? That's really what it comes down to, because we live paycheck to paycheck for the most part when it comes to Main Street economics. So let's talk about how really a downturn or crisis in our market actually could benefit Americans. Now, please, I don't want to see bad times in America. But what I'm trying to get you to understand is when we hear the news tell us how bad the markets are, when it really comes down to it, it doesn't affect you so much. Now, if we see that our market falls out, here's what happens when the market falls out. Usually there are some businesses that close, some banks that struggle, but what actually happens? Interest rates go down. Fed lowers interest rates, which would actually help you with your debts, would actually help you with your mortgage rates, which would actually help you with your rent, because when mortgage goes down, rent goes down. It'd actually help you afford your credit card payments because your interest goes down. It would actually help you overall when it comes to your debt. Now I want you to get out of debt. But for the majority of Americans, they still have debt. Right now we're in record debt when it comes to our mortgage, auto, and credit cards. We're also in delinquency when it comes to our mortgage, auto, and credit cards. More than we ever have. Now, when you hear the fact that the interest rates could go down, or that some businesses are lowering their prices so their revenues can come back up so their market would look better, that part of the market crisis or crash could actually benefit you. Now, here's something else I want you to think about. When you hear that the market is going up or down, the market going down on gas, what actually happens? When the stock market goes down on gas and the price goes down, what happens? Your gas goes down. Now, what does that mean? That means we were pumping more, or there was a point where people are not using as much gas. Like, for instance, 2020, people were not going a lot, so gas was pretty cheap, and they were saying that people couldn't hardly make money in business, which is kind of a obtuse quote. I mean, it really is hyperbole, because people are still making millions of billions in the oil and gas industry. But the point was, the market going down and fluctuating actually benefited consumers for a time being, because when fuel was down, that means your goods were cheaper to get to you, and that means it was cheaper for you to travel. Now, here in Mississippi, we can't walk anywhere. We have to drive everywhere. This is not like a big city, so we can't walk anywhere. We use our car. So having a lower gas bill is a big deal for Main Street economics and for people who live in most rural America. So a market correction actually, again, would benefit the majority of Americans. Now, there was a story done that Trump was actually wanting to see a correction because it would help interest rates go down. This kind of goes along with the plan that Howard Lutnick said last week about how $150,000 and under tax benefit to where people would not pay taxes. Think about that now. If he is trying to lower the interest rates by lowering the market struggling, lowering the cost for Americans, now hear me out. All of a sudden I'm saying no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. Also, I want to make sure that everybody under $150,000 does not get taxed. All those things, quote unquote, is hurting the market. But what is it actually doing for Americans? It's actually helping Americans. All right, now let's go to the tariffs. Tariffs overall, let's talk about history. From 1776 to the Civil War, there was no Internal Revenue Service. There was no tax on Americans. The money that we had, the things that we did, the things that the government needed money for, was charged because of businesses and countries wanting to do business with America. So there was no tax on Americans. Now, there was a time during the Civil War and a little after that they raised a portion tax. It was like a flat tax. I think it was 5%, 7%. So people had to pay taxes to help with the war funding. And then it went back to normal for a while to where we didn't have any taxes on Americans, all the way up until basically World War I in the time of the Fed. Now, before we go any further, a word from today's sponsor. What if the next health crisis is not just a pandemic? What if it's something way bigger than that, way darker than that? Is it a coincidence that Fauci was pardoned all the way back to 2014? This 2014 marks really a 4-year period where Obama and a lot of the 3-letter agencies worked in Ukraine, had power there. You hear about Fauci's biolabs and all that stuff that went on when it comes to Ukraine. The strategic bioweapon threat is so real. It's happened really over the last decade. This is disturbing, but listen to what's worse. There's new findings showing that Pfizer could have bribed some of the people in the FDA. So the development, all this technology, was it really for help of the American people or the world? Or was it for control, power, and money? Think of the strain of the new bird flu. How now they're saying it's going to humans, it's mutating. That's why it's so important to have the wellness company's Contagion Medical Kit. There's so much in here. I'm gonna show you a graphic of some of the things that are so important when it comes to your health and in a public crisis that could get you through tough times. Dr. McCullough and his medical board includes 5 life-saving medications like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, Tamiflu, and a nebulizer designed to protect you from the next global threat. Ordering is simple. Filling out the digital intake form and your kit arrives in 1 to 2 weeks. Don't wait for the next outbreak to catch you off guard. Head to twc.health/themax and use code THEMAX to get free shipping, but not only that, to save $32 off your kit. Now, the one thing I love about these kits, I want to show you this. Now, the one I'm talking about today is the Contagion Kit, but my son just went on a trip with some friends of his and a family friend and his girlfriend, and look, I sent him with this right here. This is a kid's emergency kit. This is new from the wellness company for ages under 18. Do not miss the opportunity to protect your family. Be ready for the unexpected. I love that saying. Be ready for the unexpected. That's what we do, because the last thing I want to be doing is lining up and putting myself in a pharmaceutical line or at a doctor's office when something major happens. Check out twc.health/themax. Use promo code THEMAX. Do not be caught off guard. Okay, so what happened? The war machine, people started seeing that it could make money, and the Fed, who could manipulate rates and push the market. Those two things, along with Congress' help, implemented taxes, and we've never looked back since. Who does taxes actually benefit? I want to ask you now. Don't give me the same old, talking points. Well, we have to have it for our school systems. We have to have it for our public employees. We didn't need it for schools or public employees before, did we? Don't act like this is a different time. Americans still needed help, even in the 1800s and 1900s, maybe even more than now, because we have so much innovation and so much technology. Why do you think we are taxing our people? And then on top of that, why do we not want to go back to something like the tariff system, which actually benefits most Americans? Now, again, the market says tariffs are bad. Now, before World War I, and not really in the time of Civil War, but every other time in our history, for at least half of American history, I think it's like 125, 126 years, which is literally 50% of our history, was actually ran by tariffs and not taxing Americans. Just think if you got your payroll and every 2 weeks you receive 20 or 30 or 40% more because you were not taxed. Think how much that would impact you. So when we hear this administration is causing chaos for the markets actually benefits Americans. Tariff things actually benefits Americans because it goes to external service of revenue, which actually, truthfully, helps Americans because Americans would go back to the way they used to do things where they were not taxed. The market going down lowers the rate, so your debts are cheaper. The market going down actually lowers the cost because businesses want to make more revenue, so then they lower the price of goods. The market going down actually lowers the price of gas, which gas and fuel is actually how things get to you, so those prices are cheaper. So you see, when the market actually fluctuates, or when they're complaining about how bad the market is and how Trump is hurting and chaos and we're going to see a recession this year, those things are good talking points, and they're meant to scare you. But to be honest with you, every one of those situations could actually come back in reshaping a new America to actually go back to a time where Main Street economics actually thrives under some of these situations. Let's go back to the guy with the Great Depression. What did I tell you? He said, we didn't feel that because we really didn't spend extra money. We lived sustainable. We tried to do as much as we could independently. So he said, we didn't really know if we were rich, broke, poor, because the market didn't really affect what we were doing. We just lived day in and day out. Well, today, when you see that little red or green ticker on the bottom of the screen for your news, it's probably not affecting you too much, is it? You're just worried about paying for the things that you got paid for today and making sure you have enough payroll to come in to cover the goods that you needed this week, the debts that you had this week. So the reshaping of the market and correction of the market, when they're saying Trump is hurting it, it actually may be hurting it, but it actually may be benefiting you. Now let's talk about the second part of the video. What happens to the market every time it corrects, every time it quote-unquote crashes? It goes back up, doesn't it? All right, so let's dive into this a little deeper, and this is how you can solve the Social Security problem. And this is actually, David Freeberg ran these numbers, and I just thought it was so brilliant. So Social Security is broke. We know that. It's like $2.7 trillion in money. It's needing a whole lot more. But I want you to listen to this. What happens to the S&P or the markets when they crash? Every time, year over year, average, since the S&P has been started, the equities, basically it's made around 10% every year. So meaning it may have lost 2 or 3 years for a crash. It may have lost during the 2020, but always it comes back and becomes resilient. Now we may not understand that because we're not buying individual stocks, but overall, most of the time if you hear about money being invested in the stock market and you keep it in good quality mutual funds or equities, it pretty much gains money. We don't understand it, but it does, because there's thousands upon thousands of businesses invested in there where if some businesses are struggling, some are thriving. Now, I just talked about this market crisis, Colby. I mean, you just said you didn't care if the market fell out. But on average, the market, even when it falls out, it comes right back. And here's how you solve Social Security. Social Security is underfunded and it's broke. Do you know what Social Security has been invested in for all this year? It was invested in the Treasury stocks, really Treasury into the America. Now, American Treasury, it was actually getting 4% rate of return, meaning it was not really making a lot of money, but it was quote unquote secure. What we were doing was we were giving money to our own government to borrow against us at 4% so the government can spend our money when they didn't need to. Okay, get what I'm saying? When you buy into the treasury bonds of a country, then you're basically giving them money, debt, and they're giving you a rate of return, which is a lower rate, which is a guaranteed rate of 4%, 3%, whatever it may be. So our Social Security has been invested in something that's given us a 4% rate of return. The stock market, the S&P, has had a 10.5 to 11% rate of return ever since its inception. No matter how bad the years were, some good years, some bad years, averaged out over 10%. So even when you hear about the crisis and the crashes and the recessions, still year over year, the equity markets and the stock market is still done very well and made a lot of people very rich. If we would have invested, listen to this, and this is from David Freeberg, if we would have invested our Social Security when we got off the gold standard from 71 in the 70s, right now we have 2.7 trillion it's made by investing in something with 4% interest, the treasury bonds. If we would have done that same thing in the equities in the stock market, it would have been worth, instead of 2.7, it would have been worth 15 trillion. So 2.7 trillion, it would have literally been worth 15 trillion. So first and foremost, the Social Security would have been fully funded. It would have had way more money than it has now, and it wouldn't be broke. And we wouldn't be giving money to the government to borrow at a lower rate. We actually would be better in shape Social Security-wise, and also our government would not be stealing from its Social Security trust. You know, you hear Trump talking about the crypto fund, and you know he's talked about building a fund that would enrich America and have as a backup plan, kind of like a rainy day fund. We actually have that with Social Security. And David Freeberg said if we would just learn to invest in the Social Security trust, put it back into the equities and into like things like the S&P, and invest in things like that in the market and the people of America, he said what actually you would see is Social Security would blossom. It would be fully funded. Your government would not be borrowing from the Social Security trust, and actually it would make money. And that would be a sovereign wealth fund like Trump is wanting. It wouldn't be invested in anything but the American people. Now think about that. If we could take a portion, and he said if we just take $500 billion right now and invest it, take our money that's in our trust now and put it all in, expose it to the market. First of all, it would raise the market to where people, if they had pensions and retirements and the people in the market, would do very well. But what it would do for a majority of Americans, it would make their Social Security always be guaranteed and fully funded. That's why it's important. And that's how you could utilize the market and help Main Street economics. Because you know what you're thinking about right now is my Social Security check going to still come in, and can I afford my bills each and every month as you get older? If we would take our money from the government stealing our money or taking our money from our treasury, from our Social Security fund and giving us a guaranteed 4% back, think if we could take that same money, put it into the S&P, make 11% interest, we would fully fund our Social Security. It would always be guaranteed, and your government could not use that in a shutdown mentality to use to manipulate your votes. How many times have you heard the Democrats and Republicans say the other side is wanting to cut Social Security? The other side is wanting to cut Medicaid, Medicare. You wouldn't have those conversations anymore because they wouldn't have the power to either borrow from it. They wouldn't have the power to manipulate it, because ultimately it would be in the market and everyone would be invested in it. And those funds would be fully funded, and it would come back to help Main Street America. Now, I know this video goes a little deeper, but what I'm trying to say is when we hear about the recession and market crash, that could be used to help Main Street. That could really be used to help Main Street. Cut taxes, cut the cost of goods, and also cut the interest rates. Those three things. And then on top of that, what has the market done? Even when it's felt a recession or crash or speculation or issues, it's always bounced back. So if we're worried about it and we see it correct, it could benefit Main Street. But then at the same time, if we turned around and used our money from Social Security, built a sovereign wealth fund in Social Security and reinvested that $500 billion there, turned around and put it into the market where it has a track record of making 11% a year, we could fully fund Social Security. We could quit letting the government borrow money, and then we can actually see Americans invest in this. It would actually benefit every American, because then the Social Security Trust would be an investment of every American going into the system, and then they're getting their benefit back at a higher rate, and would actually probably raise Social Security rates tremendously. Because if you go from 4% to 11%, that's more money. More money in the trust means more money paid out. More money paid out means more people would have more money in their checks each and every month. So when we talk about recession in the markets, or we talk about a market crash, is it that bad? Because really what we need to do is see a reshaping of American money. And that brings me up to the last point. This is why we need a reshaping and an economic reset. I want you to listen to this. All the stuff Doge has done, all the stuff where they've talked about saving money and exposing fraud, the judges have worked against it, the Democrats have worked against it. Now the Republican Congress pushed this bill, and pretty much the Democrats and Republicans went along with it. There was one more thing. Rand Paul wanted to codify the waste, fraud, and abuse so that we would quit sending all this money across to all these foreign areas to where all this fraud was going on. I want you to listen to this. And this is why you can't trust anyone. This literally may be our last chance. This is why we got to correct all this and fix it. Despite being $37 trillion in debt, 26 Republican senators just crossed the aisle and voted to continue foreign aid, all despite Doge, which showed them major washes and major amounts of this foreign aid is going to fraud. There will be no outrage. There will be no attempts to unseat any of these people. This is from Clint Russell. I love this. All your anger was directed at people like Massey, who was trying to actually look out for American folks. And so the rest of these people are actually robbing us blind. 26 senators: Lindsey Graham, Barrasso, Boozman, Capito, Cassidy, Collins, Kramer, Crapo, Fisher, Grassley, Hoeven, Hyde-Smith, which is a Mississippi one, Lankford, McConnell, McCormick, Moron, Mullen, which is always Mark Wayne Mullen from Oklahoma, who always wants to be this conservative juggernaut, and he's not, Murkowski, Ricketts, Round, Scott, Sullivan, Thune, Tillis, Wicker, the other Mississippi senator, Young. These 26 Republican senators voted to still send money to foreign aid, even when Doge told them it was going to fraud. So I'll go back. They're taking money from Social Security, and you're getting 4% rate of return when you can make 11% if we put it in the market. Also, they're telling you how bad the market is when it's graduating and still making money each and every year. What Trump's trying to do is expose the market, bring the market down to where it can correct, where GDP and fake money is out of the system, and that would benefit, what did we say? Your economics for Main Street, which would lower your interest rates, lower your cost of goods because of gas, and also lower your price of goods because ultimately businesses want to make more revenue. Interest rates would go down. It would benefit you all the way around. This is why we got to have an economic reset, because our leaders that we put in Washington are not helping Americans. And everybody dogged out Massey. And to be honest with you, Massey was the only one actually looking out for the Americans. So, two things need to happen. The reshaping of American economy. Let's get back to Main Street economics, which I believe Trump is trying to do. At the same time, the market, even if it crashes, it benefits us now. But overall, the reshaping, restructuring, the tariffs, and then reinvesting Social Security would benefit the market. It would bounce back and would fully fund Social Security. That's my thoughts for the day. Think about what I said. Dive a little deeper on these stories and how we realize that this is smart. This is the way we need to look at it. And I'm excited to see what this next 2025 is going to bring. When you hear about a crisis in the market and Fed telling us that we're going into a recession, some of those things may not be bad because it may lower the cost of goods, your interest rates, and help Main Street economics. And of course, hopefully tariffs will bring down taxes. Think about what we talked about and how we could fully fund Social Security, and you can actually get more Social Security if they did it the right way. Guys, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you like the content. God bless.